Hi, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is May 9th, and today we are going to talk about a very, very famous and a very, very early computer game.
That's right. We are talking about one of my personal heroes, Pac-Man. To say that I am a Pac-Man fan is a wild understatement. I am a colossal Pac-Man fan. I have played this game. I've sunk many, many, many dollars into it. And I own a lot of really odd Pac-Man merchandise.
Oh, you go way beyond what I did. And I played Pac-Man every day for a while.
Really?
Yes, I did.
That's interesting. Where did you play Pac-Man?
Just on our computer at home.
Oh, really?
So I didn't spend any money, but I was trying to get the candle.
Did you go and play the arcade cabinet? That's the one you stand at. Usually you'll see them in restaurants.
Never.
Never? Really?
Never. I just played it on our computer at home, and it's very addictive.
It's very addictive, and it's something that we'll talk about later, that this is a game with broad appeal with both men and women, which is not always common with video games.
Because they tend to be designed by and for males.
Yes, and this is a game designed by a man, by men. However, they did try to alter their thinking to some wild success. And of course, there's a really good chance you know who we're talking about right now, Pac-Man. And there's a reason for it. It has an incredible legacy.
And it is now an icon of our culture. You see the Pac-Man image all over the place.
You know, it's so funny. I wrote iconic at the very top of my article because I agree. Iconic is something that's so famous that everyone knows it, even people that don't care about video games or maybe just don't have any.
It.
That's right. It came out in 1980, and I guarantee you, I know my youngest students know who Pac-Man is.
Wow.
Because I have little Pac-Man figurines in my classroom, and they'll point out, hey, that's Pac-Man.
And they know him. That's amazing. Well, let's find out about Pac-Man. Our title is The Legacy of Pac-Man. Pac-Man is by far one of the most recognizable video game characters in history. That is in large part because he was the first character to ever appear in a video game, making him the grandfather of all video game characters. Pac-Man was first introduced in Japan on May 22nd, 1980, with the release of the famous Pac-Man arcade game. The game is in many people's memory of childhood and teenage years. Even today, up to 6 million players are still mad about it.
The name Pac-Man came from a Japanese expression, paku paku tabaru, which means to eat in a wild manner. The sound paku paku mimics the sound of a person chomping their food. In English, the game was first called Puck-Man, but was changed to Pac-Man before it was launched in the U.S.
The game was created by Toru Iwatani, a Japanese video game designer. Hoping to make a game that would appeal to both men and women, Iwatani decided the focus of the game should be on eating, something that everyone can relate to. Even Pac-Man's shape is based on food. The inspiration for Pac-Man's character came from a pizza with a single slice removed. The space where the slice was missing became the character's mouth.
In the video game, players must travel through a maze and eat dots of energy while avoiding the ghosts that roam the passageways. If one of the ghosts, who are named Blinky, Pinky, Inky, and Clyde, catches Pac-Man, then the player loses a life. While the concept is simple, finishing the game is anything but easy. In fact, the original Pac-Man can't even be completed because of a glitch on the 256th level.
So I have to ask you, Chris, did you reach the 256th level?
No. In fact, only a few people have in history, including a ridiculous man that was just in the news this morning.
Really?
Yes,
you're kidding.
Yes, he's a cartoon character of a human being, but he's a really good Pac-Man player.
From the U.S.?
Yes.
Figures.
So just to describe this man, he has a mullet, which is a very old-fashioned haircut, long hair in the back. He wears an American tie everywhere he goes. And when he gets a top score, you can put in your name in the game. You write your initials. My initials are CAP. He always puts USA. Just to give you an idea, the kind of person
patriotic.
this guy is. He's very patriotic.
So where does he live? Do you know?
Do you want to guess? Just take a guess. Think of where this person could live.
Arkansas.
Florida.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't this make sense?
South. Okay, this may actually cover a lot of cultural background that not all our listeners have. We'll try to cover it as we go over the article. Our title again is The Legacy of Pac-Man. How do you describe a legacy?
So a legacy, I thought about this. The legacy in this context is the impact of something or somebody has from the past on the current times.
Okay, so that means that you have done something notable in your life and it gets passed on to your children and maybe not just your children, but to the whole culture.
That's
that is
right.
a legacy.
It's related to the word legend.
Okay, our first paragraph. Pac-Man is by far one of the most recognizable video game characters in history. Now, that is a broad, sweeping statement. Broad and sweeping means you are making a very big claim. You better be sure that it's true before you say something like this. In your own writing, if you're not so sure, you can hedge. H-E-D-G-E, H-E-D-G-E. We might say Pac-Man is by far, perhaps, you can hedge it. Because if you're not absolutely sure that you're right, be careful about making an absolute kind of a statement. But apparently this writer is very sure.
I agree with this statement.
Okay, you're probably right. And the word recognizable is interesting because it has two stresses. Not just recognizable or recognizable, it's recognizable. You really have to put two stresses in it to read it right. So wherever you go, people will recognize this game character in all of history. I mean, that's really a big deal. That is in large part because he was the first character to ever appear at a video game, making him the grandfather of all video game characters. Now, the word grandfather here is really interesting. That means there's a really great word in Chinese for it, which means the beginning ancestor. That means he was the one who started this whole thing, which ended up being a huge thing.
This is absolutely correct. Pac-Man is what we call a mascot, M-A-S-C-O-T. This is a character or a person that represents a brand. We can think of McDonald's. There's a clown, and that clown represents McDonald's. Pac-Man is a mascot that represents what I would call the classic era of gaming. Now, this sounds a little funny because Pac-Man came out in 1980, but the very first video games came out in the late 1960s.
Oh, 60s.
60s, that's
wow,
right, the very
70s,
first ones.
Yeah.
But 70s is where they really got their footing with like Pong and Space Invaders and Breakout. These games didn't have mascots. You just had a ball or like a little spaceship. There was no person or character to represent you.
A bunch of invaders.
Before Pac-Man, there were no characters. After Pac-Man, mascots and characters were everywhere.
I didn't really know that. Yeah, I knew he was big, but I didn't realize it was that big of a change. Pac-Man was first introduced in Japan on May 22nd, 1980, with the release of the famous Pac-Man arcade game. I didn't know they would know it that precisely, but I guess it's in their history, and the people who created him will certainly have records of when it happened. And the next thing that came to mind as I was reading this was Chris talking about playing Pac-Man in a video game arcade. That's something I have never done.
So an arcade is a place where you will go play video games. Usually they were in malls or they would be in the front of a laundromat or a place you had to spend time. Like while you're waiting to sit down at a restaurant, they'll have 2 or 3 arcade cabinets. Those are big boxes that have usually one arcade game in it. And you put in 25 cents, which is about what, NT?
8 NT maybe?
8 NT, 9 NT, sure. Yeah. And you play for 2 or 3 minutes, then you try to beat your friend's score. And it is a very addictive process. In the first year alone, Pac-Man made over $1 billion.
You're kidding.
$1 billion.
And I just want to mention that Chris was describing the situation in North America at the time. In Taiwan, I was already in Taiwan by then.
Really?
Yes, I was here in the 70s. So I saw the beginning of it at that time because, you know, in Taiwan, we have a lot of small to medium-sized stores rather than these huge, gigantic stores, which we have now, but there were not so many back then. It was just like you would have like a sundries store and then a bakery and then a video arcade. They were just scattered among the other stores in Taiwan.
My wife, her grandparents owned a very small convenience store. And in the front, they didn't have Pac-Man, but they had the next big game after Pac-Man, which was Donkey Kong. So the gorilla, and he throws barrels, and Mario's at the bottom.
Yeah.
My wife, when she was very small, would play Donkey Kong in the very front of her family's convenience store.
How interesting. I wasn't as into Donkey Kong, but I was definitely into Pac-Man. Our next sentence, the game is in many people's memory of childhood and teenage years.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this game. It's just to say that. It's so simple and very addictive.
Yes, and challenging. And you get really irritated when you've just missed it. And then you want to play it again. You want to get that candle. I was always after the candle. Even today, up to 6 million players are still mad about it. And mad here does not mean angry. It means crazy about it, which means you love it a lot.
Now, honestly, when I saw 6 million players, I thought, that's it?
That's all?
I think this is maybe just based upon like verified sales. I will tell you, Pac-Man is still very widely played.
Yes, but I think it's probably on your home computer rather than in an arcade.
Home computer? Well, you can now have the actual arcade experience on your cell phone or your electronic device. Those game files are tiny and they fit on our devices very easily.
Right.
It's just not the same experience as holding that controller and those things, but it's effectively the same game. Plus the many versions like the one you played on your computer and the other versions that came out.
Wow, it was a big deal. Let's move on. Next paragraph.
The name Pac-Man came from a Japanese expression. Karen, would you say this sentence? Because you say it so well.
Paku paku taberu.
Sounds so pretty. I like Japanese. Which means to eat in a wild manner.
Okay, so they got the name from one of these expressions in Japanese. And there are lots and lots of expressions like these in Japanese to describe either a sound or some kind of emotion, like horu horu or something like that. They are reduplicatives. That means it's the same word repeated. It's usually 2 syllables, and you add a verb at the end. And this is a very typical one. Paku paku taberu. That means that you are chomping, as the sentence says.
That's right. And Karen did a nice English version of this, chomp, chomp, chomp. This is an onomatopoeia. This is a word that describes your sound that you're making. So I think like goo, 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 or what's another good one?
Mo. I don't know, gao, 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 or something.
We don't say mo in Chinese. We say mu.
That's
you say
right.
moo. So those are onomatopoeias that represent these sounds.
Or wang, wang, wang for dogs.
Yes, that's a good one.
Yeah.
You can also duplicate the sound Pac-Man makes with your own body. This is true. This is a weird thing. If you remember what Pac-Man really sounds like, you put your finger in your ear and you move it up and down. You have to put it in the hole. And I swear it sounds just like Pac-Man.
I didn't know that. I'm going to go home and try it. Goodness. Okay.
Let's go to our next sentence. The sound paku paku mimics the sound of a person chomping their food.
Mimic means to copy or to imitate. So in Japanese, you have all these expressions that, like Chris said, they're onomatopoeia. They are sounds that actually imitate the sound that something else produces, in this case of people chewing on their food.
In English, the game was first called Puck-Man, but was changed to Pac-Man before it was launched in the U.S.
What do you think of when you see Puck-Man?
I know the reason why it was changed. So
we'll get to that in a minute.
Maybe the truth blinds me what you're going for.
Oh, what I'm going for is I'm just an ordinary Minnesotan close to the border. I think of a Canadian playing hockey.
Oh, yes.
That's what I think of. He's a Puck-Man.
This is actually when they first came up with the name Puck-Man, they were thinking
hockey.
The pizza, as we've kind of already described. Pizza was their inspiration, but they were thinking, how do we sell this to a Western audience?
Right.
It looks like a hockey puck.
Looks like a hockey puck.
That's right. They didn't go with the pizza option. They went with a hockey puck. So he was called Puck-Man. But what's the problem with this name?
You're going to explain it to us, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Do you know? You must know.
I can think of something maybe obscene possibly is associated with
right.
it. Because usually when people make a big change, it's because it makes people think of something that's not proper.
That's right. So Puck-Man looks like a very naughty word in English. It ends in UCK.
Yeah.
And P looks like the letter F. I'll let you do the math.
Well, tell me a word that starts with F and ends with UCK.
I don't want to get fired.
No. Fire truck. Okay, you can remember that one. You can try that on people.
This is a good joke for my older students.
Okay, so they changed it for that reason. But honestly, I suppose I had it in my mind as a possibility. But that image of a really padded Canadian guy playing hockey, and like whipping that puck across the ice and hitting somebody in the cheek was really strong.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, paragraph 3. The game was created by Toru Iwatani, a Japanese video game designer. So that tells you who actually invented this game. First of all, he's Japanese. His profession was designing video games, and his name is Toru Iwatani. You can check the Chinese characters in your magazine. Hoping to make a game that would appeal to both men and women, Iwatani decided the focus of the game should be on eating, something that everyone can relate to. Now, what this makes me think of is, what do Taiwanese love to talk about most?
Oh, food.
Food, right?
Food.
Now, we kind of put that on Chinese speakers, but we talk a lot about food too.
Yeah,
Probably
I
in any
suppose
language.
so.
Yeah, but it's really serious in Chinese-speaking culture.
I agree. I think it's a very good distinction because foreigners also talk a lot about food, but
Yes.
I think there is extra emphasis because I know if I ever share a story about a location or back home, students love to ask me, what's the food like?
Exactly.
That's a
Yeah.
question I wouldn't normally ask.
That's right. So food is a huge, huge topic in Taiwan. I would say it's a big topic elsewhere. It's just even bigger here, I would say. And I really like the fact that he did try to address both men and women because women are often left out of video game design. And I, frankly, was totally put off by most video games that came out. In the early days, it wasn't so bad when they were simpler, but I am not interested in shooting people constantly. I don't like the violence. I don't like using women as sex objects. It doesn't appeal to me. I'm sorry. I'm a straight woman. This really does not appeal. I find it kind of disgusting myself. So this game actually succeeded because I was not a huge computer person, but I got addicted to Pac-Man. And also note in this sentence, it says that eating is something that everyone can relate to. When they say can relate to, that means it's a subject that interests you, that you can really get into.
Speaking of this topic of appealing to women, the sequel, the part 2 of Pac-Man was called Ms. Pac-Man.
That's right.
A lot of people think it's Mrs. Pac-Man. That's wrong.
It's Ms.
Pac-Man. M-S period. Now, when we say Ms., we're trying to tell you that this person is, female, and she's probably at least 20 years old, and we don't know if she's married.
And it's none of your business.
This is right. However, this was also intentional. They did not want to call her Mrs. Pac-Man on purpose.
Miss was already out of fashion.
There's another reason.
Okay.
There's another reason.
Okay.
So Mrs. Pac-Man, M-R-S, implies that she's married, but it also implies that she's a little bit older.
Old.
And video games generally are a young person's hobby.
Right.
They didn't want to call her and,
put people off with
that's
the
right,
age.
old lady
Yeah.
Pac-Man.
Yep.
Now, Pac-Man Part 3 was already planned while they were making Pac-Man Part 2. And Pac-Man Part 3 was going to be called Pac-Man Jr. It was going to feature a baby Pac-Man. So they didn't want to call her Miss Pac-Man, M-I-S-S, because it implies she's a little girl.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to think about little girls having babies. And so the name Ms. Pac-Man was intentionally chosen to fit that middle ground of not too young and not too old. And also the whole unwed mother crisis of the 80s. That was a big cultural what to do.
And keep in mind that Miss is completely out of fashion. We don't use it anymore at all. Okay, to continue, even Pac-Man's shape is based on food. So just the shape of the character itself is based on food. The inspiration for Pac-Man's character came from a pizza with a single slice removed. And excuse me for mentioning another brand name, but it sort of reminds me of Apple, where there is a bite taken out of the apple. It somehow feels like you're already engaging with it. Somebody's already started working on it. The space where the slice was missing became the character's mouth.
My wife, who has no interest in video games, saw a cheesecake we had made a few weeks ago. And we had cut out one slice, and she says, oh, look, it looks like Pac-Man.
Ah.
She has no interest in video games, and even to her, she recognizes this form.
Iconic. Okay, your turn.
In the video game, players must travel through a maze and eat dots of energy while avoiding the ghosts that roam the passageways.
And that's a very clear, succinct, to-the-point description of the whole game. You are moving Pac-Man through a maze. You can't go into a place where it's blocked. You have to go through a place where you can get through. And as you are moving, you're just eating dot, 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 dot. It gives you energy, but you have to watch out because these ghosts are always around, and you have to watch out that you do not get eaten by the ghosts.
The word roam here means to walk around. It feels a little bit aimless, like they don't have a goal, but in fact, they're all programmed different ways.
Oh, interesting.
Our next sentence, if one of the ghosts, who are named Blinky, Pinky, Inky, and Clyde, catches Pac-Man, then the player loses a life.
And that was always kind of scary for me. I thought, oh my God, I've died. But then I learned how it works in a video game. You get more lives.
I love the color of the ghosts. To me, it's one of those things that stand out. Pac-Man is a very dark game. It's a black screen with a very deep indigo blue for the maze. And Pac-Man is a very bright, vivid yellow. And these ghosts, Pinky, Blinky, Inky, and Clyde, are red, pink, cyan, which is a bright blue, and orange. And it's a very beautiful contrasting game, very eye-catching.
Actually, I played it in just two colors, just dark blue and basically very light gray.
Okay, let's continue to our next sentence. While the concept is simple, finishing the game is anything but easy.
Yeah, tell me about it.
It is. It takes hours and hours and hours to reach the final level, which we'll see in the next sentence.
And then you almost get there and you have to start all over again. It'd drive you nuts.
If you want to reach 256, the final level, and you want to get a perfect game, I mean, it's maybe 7 hours of just continuous play. Let's continue. In fact, the original Pac-Man can't even be completed because of a glitch on the 256th level.
This is a really funny and very useful word. A glitch is something that is wrong. There is an error somewhere. Something is not working right. And as a player who's been spending a lot of time on it, if you find out the reason you can't reach the level is the game's fault, you will get really upset.
That's right. When a game is designed in a poor way, you can get captured and you have to wait to die and restart. This is called soft locking. Glitches is when the program itself has a problem. And I agree, it's an extremely useful word. Pac-Man on the 256th level actually runs out of data, out of its memory, because of this is an 8-bit game. And if you know anything about programming, those numbers will roll over and half of the screen just becomes nonsense. It's unplayable, it's unfinishable, and it's an iconic thing. You can actually download a game called Pac-Man 256 to kind of experience that. It's a free game, it's quite fun, and it's a new way to play Pac-Man.
And it's a new way to be frustrated. Okay, we have 2 questions for you. What did you learn? 1, why did the creator of Pac-Man focus the game on eating?
Well, eating is something we all do, so it appeals to both men and women.
Number 2, what is the objective of the Pac-Man game?
The objective of Pac-Man is to travel through a maze and eat dots of energy while avoiding those 4 ghosts that roam the hallway. Before we go, I have a final story for everyone. One of the earliest and most important games was Pong. And Pong is a lot like tennis. It's just 2 little paddles that bounce a ball back and forth.
And it was very, very simple.
Very simple. And when it first came out, the company that developed it, Atari, asked a few bar owners, hey, can we put this here? And we want to test our product. And the bar owner says, okay. And that same night, they call him, and the bar owner is super mad. He says, get this pile of garbage out of my restaurant. What is it doing here? It broke on the first night.
Oh.
And they feel really confused. And so they travel all the way to this bar, and the guy looks at, he turns it on. It turns on fine. He touches the buttons. It works okay.
Yeah.
And so he unlocks it, the machine where all the internal computer boards are, and he opens it, and piles of money fell out. The problem was that there was so much money inside that they could not stuff even 1 more quarter inside. The game broke because it was that successful.
Too successful. The problems of success. That's it for today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.